Hello and welcome to Thrive in 5. Seems like the sausage and bacon eaters of the world got some bad news this week as the World Health Organization announced there's a link between processed meats and cancer. And whether or not that's true, it certainly highlights something I think we can all agree upon, which is what we put in our bodies is an important issue. There's a local health-oriented grocery store in my neighborhood that specializes in organic fruits and vegetables, and it always amazes me. People are willing to pay sometimes 50% or even more for these foods. And to me, it's like chopping in Tiffany's, but whether or not we're into that, I think it illustrates the extent that people are willing to go to make sure that what they put inside their bodies is healthy and good for them. Which leads us to this week's Torah reading, which is all about Avraham, our forefather. I think Avraham would make it to most people's top 3 Jewish heroes list, not only because he's the founder and CEO of the Jewish people, but because he was a great activist. He was an activist on behalf of the poor. He fed them. He was an activist on behalf of the weak and the powerless. He stood for justice. But if we look at the real focus of Avraham's activism, it was actually monotheism. Avraham was the world's first monotheism activist. And we could see this from the oral tradition, by the way, because it teaches us that Avraham and Sarah not only fed the people that passed by their tent, but they would insist that those people bless the source of the food before they let them go. As a matter of fact, we're taught that Abraham would charge them for the food if they refused until they relented. Abraham, I think, teaches us a very important lesson. Yes, what we put into our bodies is important, but far more important is what we put up here. Because what's in here, more than any other factor, will determine the quality of our lives. And a single idea that we have that is unhealthy can make a giant difference, just as much as an idea that's healthy. I think as a society we tend to gravitate often towards superficial answers to the issues we face. Take, for example, gun violence. It seems like a week barely passes before another crazy person walks into a school or a mall and leaves a trail of dead bodies behind them. And we quickly hear the calls for more gun control afterwards. And I'm not here to weigh in on this, by the way, because I think it is an important issue for society whose hands we put guns into. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize it's not the guns that kill, it's what's in here. We know this. We always ask what drove them to do it. We know that healthy people don't shoot up schools and restaurants, regardless of whether they have a single gun or an entire arsenal. We of all societies should understand that the problem isn't ultimately in the hardware. It's a software problem. I'm not so sure that Avraham would make it onto most people's heroes lists today. And it's not just because he's not a pop star or a sports figure, but even those of us who have more substantial heroes like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa, these were people who stood for important ideas about social justice. But Avraham's focus was on the big issues, what we would consider to be fine points of philosophy and religion, like God and purpose and morality and suffering and evil. And he focused on these ideas, I think, because he understood that these ideas, more than any other, determine not just the quality of our own personal lives, but the quality of the world that we live in. And it's arguable, certainly, to say that the ideas that Abraham introduced to the world absolutely changed the world in profoundly positive ways. And that the very country we live in today, the United States, is the wonderful bastion of freedom and liberty to a large degree because it's based upon the ideas that Avraham taught. It's not just what we put in here, but far more important what we put in here. And we have to ask ourselves, how much effort, how much time do we devote to making sure that this stuff is healthy? How relentless are we in making sure that we get the answers that we need when it comes to the big issues in life? And I understand it's not easy. It's complicated. There are a lot of opinions. But the good news is Avraham left us with a legacy. He left us with a 3,000-year-old tradition which has profound insight about all of these issues. And even if we don't agree with all of the conclusions, they at least offer us a very, very helpful starting point for our own explanation to these important questions. I'd like to end with a short commercial, which is that I will be restarting the study of a classic 18th century work of Jewish philosophy called Derech Hashem, the Way of God. And this is a book that deals in a very, very insightful and deep way with all of these issues and much, much more. The Jewish New Year just recently began. It's still time for us to make a resolution, and I urge you to give it a shot. Join us, give it a try. And hopefully you can make it, but if you can't, at least I hope to see you again next week or I should say next month, for another edition of Thrive in 5.